Hi, and welcome to Three Questions with everybody. Shawn Walsh with us from Encore Strategic. So we're going to talk about the 8 factors that determine business value. Shawn, we're on factor number 3, my friend. How you doing today?
I am doing fantastic, Kevin. Thank you for having me on. And
Appreciate
factor number 3, and just to recap, our first factor was EBITDA, or financial performance. And then the other 7 factors we talk about are the things that will drive the multiple of your business when you go to sell it. So we talked about monopoly control. Is your product unique? How do you differentiate yourself? And then today we're going to talk about the Switzerland structure. So that's factor number 3. So what comes to mind for you, Kevin, when you hear the country Switzerland? What's the first thing that tends to come to mind?
neutrality.
Neutrality, independence. They stand alone. They're not dependent on any outside country or political influence or things like that. And in a manner of speaking, it's the same thing in your business. You want your business to be able to stand alone and not be dependent on an outside factor. Because if you're dependent on an outside factor, the outside factor things can go badly for them and they take you down with it. And so the idea here is you want to build a business that is resilient and can stand on its own. And the 3 things that we look at with the Switzerland structure is: are we dependent on any one customer? Are we dependent on any one vendor? And are we dependent on any one employee? And those are 3 factors that in most small businesses you can really wind up struggling with if you're not careful. And we all go through a phase of this. And when we start our companies, typically we have 1 or 2 customers that we're able to bootstrap into being an entrepreneur and starting our company. And our revenue is very dependent on 1 or 2 or a few of those customers. But as we grow our company, we really need to focus on selling our way out of having 1 customer that can hold us hostage, or 1 customer where the tail can wag the dog and they can, where they say jump and we say how high. You need to run your business your way, and you can't have 1 client or 2 clients dictating where your business is going. One of the things that we look at to measure this with our clients is that we look at what is the percentage of revenue that any 1 client represents. And in the beginning, it's not uncommon. When I started my company, when I went out full-time on my own, I had 1 client that was 50% of my revenue. And I knew I was in trouble if I lost them. And I knew there was a clock ticking on that. But we sold our way out of it, and things went well. And that client did eventually go away, but we were fine. So I will tell you, when you sell your business, a buyer is going to look at that. That's one of the key things they're going to look at in due diligence. And they are going to be looking for no 1 customer to represent more than 5 or 6% of the revenue. Anything over 10 is going to be a red flag. So, as you're getting ready to sell your business, or you're thinking about the future, one of the things you want to think about is, do you have one of those whale clients that represents an inordinate percentage of your revenue? And if so, you want to sell your way out of it. I mean, obviously, you don't want to get rid of somebody who's giving you a lot of money, but you want to get a lot of other customers to reduce the percentage that 1 client represents. So,
Shawn, one of the things I've seen, because it's your industry, is in tech. Many companies I deal with have that 1 whiz-bang genius technician who's their go-to person. And God forbid, if that person gets up and leaves, the company is in a lot of trouble.
Always a really big problem in a lot of the tech companies we do consulting for. It's not unusual to have that 1, stellar employee.
But what do you do about it, though? Because if they get mad, or someone realizes just how smart Shawn is, hey, Shawn, you want to come play with us? I'll give you way more money. And you're like, okay, Kevin.
Yeah, and we refer to that as a linchpin employee. So, they're a linchpin. If you take them away, things fall apart. And what you need to be doing is very early on, you need to be cross-training your people. You need to take that linchpin and you need to have them coaching somebody else in case they get hit by a bus.
Yeah.
And, or in case they decide to go someplace else. You should never have somebody, an employee who can hold you hostage. So if you have one employee that holds a skill or information that you can't live without, you need to make sure that skill or that information gets transferred to somebody else. I've seen this happen with way too many clients. I've had clients where, all of a sudden that employer realizes they're a linchpin and comes and starts making unreasonable demands on salary or time off. I've also seen where, something happens in life. It's not malicious. They just go, they move on. And meanwhile, you're kind of left hanging. So that is something that you really need to be thinking ahead of time and making sure that you don't have somebody that can hold you hostage. And, God forbid, the person has a negative impact on your culture. That's another one I've seen where you've got this person who is this linchpin employee, but they are poisoning your culture and they don't represent your core values. And, there's nothing that will demoralize good employees than watching you hold on to a bad one.
Yep.
And so you really have to be aware of that. And you cannot let somebody poison your culture at any cost.
Let's talk a little bit about the vendor one, because that's another area where we get reliant on one particular vendor, and then something happens, their pricing goes up, or they just can't simply provide you with what you want because you're not a big enough client for them to focus on you. How do you prevent that from happening?
Yeah, you always want to have multiple vendors that you can draw from, even if one is a principal. The one great thing about being in the internet age is it's easy to find competitors for your vendors. But every now and then we might be in an industry that where somebody has something that's very unique. And a client of mine, a good example is a client of mine was an Apple dealer. And, back before Apple took off, when they were still recovering, they had independent dealers who sold Apple equipment, and he did very well. And he probably could have sold his business at one point for several $1 million. But then Apple started clawing back those dealers, those independent dealerships, because they opened the Apple store. They didn't want those independent dealers anymore. And Apple started cutting his profitability, and basically then told him, sorry, you're done. And he's sitting there going, whoa, what happened here? And he had to reinvent his business. And he's a very smart businessman. And luckily for him, he was able to reinvent it. But he, he'll tell you the biggest mistake he made was not selling that back, when the numbers were high. But how do you replace a vendor like Apple? So in that particular case, you may not be able to replace the vendor or have an alternate vendor, but you can add additional services to your company so that if things go south with that vendor, it isn't devastating.
So
and
sorry.
he was able to do that after the fact, but he says, I wish I had thought about adding these other services beforehand.
But that's the problem, Shawn. It's only natural. Things are going well. You're crushing. You're making a ton of money. You don't think, oh my God, what could go wrong? You're kind of busy cashing the checks, to be honest.
Yeah. You know what? That's the biggest mistake we all make. When things are going good, we don't ever think about what happens. How can things go badly? And some of us have that pessimistic voice that says, yeah, eventually the other shoe is going to fall. And you need to play devil's advocate and say, what if I lose this vendor? In the company that I had, we were in the technology space, and I had 3 different distributors that I was able to use. And it was great because if one didn't have inventory, I could go to the other. And, and occasionally I could play them off of each other and beat them up on price and see who's going to give me the best discount if it was something they all carried. And you need to use that you need to use that kind of leverage and have that kind of alternative, so that when you need to squeeze margin, you have those options.
So Shawn, if people have questions about this, what's the best way to reach out to you?
They can get me at Shawn at SHAWN at encorestrategic.io. And they can feel free to email me with questions. I'm also on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook for our business, Encore Strategic.
Awesome, Shawn. Appreciate you taking a few minutes to come on the show. And as always, thanks for being my friend.
Thank you, Kevin. Look forward to the next chapter.